My name is Luke Beckman. I am the Division Disaster State Relations Director for California. That, despite that being a long title, what that basically means is I'm one of your Pacific Division staff, primarily supporting the state of California, secondarily supporting Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands, and tertiarily supporting the rest of the country. But my primary responsibility in the division is to focus externally, while also supporting our teams, building capacity, providing training, working with our regional staff and volunteer leadership. But my external duties have me focusing on the California Office of Emergency Services, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and about a dozen other state and federal agencies, as well as companies, coalitions, partnerships that are external to the Red Cross. So trying to cover down on statewide things for us. California is unique with two other states, with Texas and Florida, in that we are A, very busy, and B, multi-region states. So state of Texas, state of Florida, each have multiple regions. I talk regularly with my counterparts in those two states. We all deploy around the country, but it is unique in that we are juggling relationships between multiple regions, large cities, large jurisdictions, large economies, but also trying to wrangle that in one place. What I want to do today with this agenda, I have very high level, bare bones agenda, but do a little bit of background on the role, the working environment that we have at the State Operations Center, some roles and responsibilities, Mass Care and Shelter Task Force, partnerships, lessons learned, and questions. I'll keep this agenda slide up until I go into some of the documents that we use. But with respect to the background at the State Operations Center, we've had the Red Cross has had an evolving, rolling relationship with the state of California. I've been in this role for coming up on a year and a half, almost 2 years, and was with the Red Cross as a paid employee for about 5 years prior to that, and as a volunteer since 2005. I started as a volunteer in the Bay Area with the Red Cross, and really we are as strong as our weakest county when it comes to our relationship at the state level. One of the things that I've tried to focus on in this role as we work with the state and in the State Operations Center, what we've really tried to focus on is strengthening our territory, and our regional responses. And if we do the small operations right, then things at the state level are pretty smooth. What I focus on a lot is catastrophic planning, large-scale responses. That's really when the engines rev up. But the State Operations Center does activate for what we would call probably a large regional response, perhaps a level, not really a level 2, but a level 3 and 4. Parts of the State Operations Center may activate, but certainly for level 5, 6, and 7 operations, we will see either a partial or a full-scale activation of the State Operations Center. The Operations Center, I will call it the SOC, S-O-C. The SOC is located in Mather, California, right outside Sacramento. It's about 20 minutes without traffic from the Red Cross Sacramento office. And it is your traditional big state operations center. If you search California State Operations Center, what you'll actually get, if we go to our friend Google here, for anybody who goes, you will see a bunch of different operation centers, but it's Cal OES. That's really what you want to focus on. In Mather, California, don't worry about that phone number there. But you'll notice that it is actually in a pretty strategically located place in the state. You are a ways away from government offices, but the Operations Center is co-located with Cal OES, so their staff are on premises. And for all state agencies, it's about 20 minutes outside of town for them to be able to move when activated. The Operations Center is traditionally very quiet when not activated, but as you see here with the layout, the way the desks are situated is very standard historical State Operations Center layout. They may change that. Your command and general staff sit up front. There's a whole bunch of screens that show news or charts or graphs, often our shelter and mass care numbers. are up on that screen. And let me blow this up a little bit. We don't need Pinterest here. But what I'll show here is that there are a number of rooms off to the side. Each of these rooms, when the Operations Center is activated, turns into some kind of a task force room. We have the Business Operations Task Force, which is located here, foreground on the right. And then just directly to the right of that is actually the Mass Care and Shelter Task Force room. That is where we as the Red Cross operate when activated for larger operations. There can be up to a dozen people in that at one time. It's a large room. We do have a desk on the floor of the State Operations Center. We're using that less and less frequently these days. But it is a highly collaborative environment. The shifts run 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on the overnight. And what I really wanted to focus on today is not so much the nitty-gritty, but what I want to do is point you to some of the resources that we have on our Pacific Division SharePoint site, and I will be updating this immediately following this call with the latest documents. Let's go over here. On our Pacific Division SharePoint site, again, if you don't have this link, please send me an email after this call and I will send you the link. But if you go over to Government Liaisons, right now this is blank. We're looking to build this out, but the other place that we will have some documents is actually here, California statewide documents. In our general documents section on the right hand side, California statewide documents. And we will have a whole bunch of different things located and listed here. But what I want to point out is that we actually have a guide, American Red Cross Guide to Working at the California State Operations Center. There is not a specific training for the State Operations Center. This is the beginning. Anyone who will work at the State Operations Center will be expected to go through this kind of a call. I'll put this video up on YouTube again for someone to be able to watch that. But it really is, it's very touchy-feely. It is really around trust. It's based on relationships, but is putting it as straightforward as possible. We're looking for folks who are certainly government operations supervisors and certainly government operations managers. But I will get into in a bit, when we activate on larger operations, we're looking for a different type of individual to serve as a point person. I'll dig into that and what that means, but needless to say, anyone who goes into the State Operations Center will have the Red Cross Guide. They will also have the Mass Care and Shelter Task Force Standard Operating Procedure in their hands, and several other documents, all of which will be located on our Pacific Division SharePoint site, documents, and then you'll see California statewide documents there. So getting into the second part here, after the working environment, looking at roles and responsibilities. So the Red Cross in California, different from Florida, different from similar to Texas, but slightly different. In every state we have a different relationship at the state level, but a different relationship not only with the State Emergency Management Agency, but also with respect to mass care. So in California, the Red Cross is the co-lead for Emergency Function 6. In California, which goes by SEMS, Statewide Emergency Management System, which is a slight adjustment off of National Incident Management System, but does also leverage the Incident Command System. California says EF as opposed to ESF, Emergency Support Function. So we are the co-lead for EF6 with the California Department of Social Services, CDSS. At the federal level, we are co-lead with FEMA for ESF6. But what that means at the state level is that CDSS, California Department of Social Services, is the lead state agency for sheltering, for food, for comfort, for what we do. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to who does the work, we put, for 98% of responses, we put 98% of workers into shelters. Department of Social Services does have some teams that they can deploy, We won't get into the specifics there, but the short answer is they have FAST teams, functional assessment support teams. Those are folks who are really working with us hand in hand and working with the counties to make sure that we are good with respect to disability integration and access and functional needs. So they're looking to make sure we've got wheelchair ramps, that we have appropriate sinks, showers, toilets, food, hydration, all of those different things. And they're basically reporting back to make sure that we're checking all the boxes and doing right by our clients. They also deploy VEST team members. Those are voluntary emergency support teams, and those are effectively mostly government employees. Could be some volunteers who are called in, but these are government workers. There's, I think, about 2,000 around the state who are trained by social services to work in shelters with us. So if you are leading a Red Cross operation and you hear either FAST or you hear VEST, have no fear. They are folks working very closely with us, side by side, hand in hand, and they do wonderful work. But again, 98% of the mass care workforce that goes into shelters is provided by the Red Cross. The way that we manage the EF6 relationship, the way that we manage mass care at the state level with California Department of Social Services, is very much a hand-in-hand relationship. If you hopefully most of the folks on this call know a bit about the incident command system, but we effectively function in a unified command model. So I sit as a co-equal to a woman named Leanne Rafanti, who is the director of the Disaster Services Bureau of the Department of Social Services. And on large operations, she and I are making joint decisions. We're coordinating with our agencies, coordinating with all of our stakeholders, and in Blue Sky, in steady state operations, we're working to basically not only build out capacity, but to manage relationships. And then she has a whole team of emergency service coordinators, ESCs, and if you've deployed in California, there's a good chance that you've run into an ESC running around one of our shelters somewhere, working to pull levers and make things happen at the state level. When it comes to roles and responsibilities, what we're really looking at, we kind of have a pivot point. And what I'm going to do is I'll bring up one of our documents here. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. When it comes to roles and responsibilities, what we're really looking at is that there's a couple different phases that we're focusing on, but within the initial response period, which is 0 to 72 hours, we're working to build out additional capacity in this, and we've been fairly successful up to this point, but we're certainly not perfect in having Northern California coastal region and Gold Country region support with the initial folks to hold the line, if you will, in the SOC. To serve as that liaison to make sure information is flowing seamlessly and to make sure state agencies are getting the information they need. More recently, at the state scale, Gold Country and Northern California Coastal have had the actual fires, and in one instance, Robin Friedman, our regional disaster officer in Gold Country, was one of the folks who deployed to the lead, to serve as the lead for the Red Cross in the State Operations Center for I think the first day and a half, and the state agencies loved having Robin there. That wasn't his ultimate responsibility to maintain that presence. But again, having those connections, those touch points, understanding relationships, knowing people face to face, and in Robin's case, knowing the region and knowing the responders was very, very helpful. But we're working to build out capacity in our government operations, government relations cadre for folks who can deploy to the State Operations Center. If this is something that is of interest to you, please also let me know that, and we will work to get you opportunities, trained, exercised, and really just get experience. Like I said, there isn't necessarily a checklist of you have to have these 30 things in order to deploy to the State Operations Center. It really is about relationships and trust, and it's about our team having familiarity with you and you having familiarity with the processes, and then slowly getting to know some of the folks, whether in person or virtually. But our initial response usually is staffing for the first operations briefing, the operations period, and getting someone there for that A shift, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We may be asked to cover the B shift, in which case we'll bring in a second individual to support. We are never there by ourselves. We are always sitting with Department of Social Services. They have unlike us, they have a full-time roster of full-time paid employees whose responsibility it is to sit in the State Operations Center. So they can always have someone there in a very short period of time, and they always have a duty roster. They have on-call and off-call periods of time. But what I want to focus on is for our sustained response. And basically at this point, the division will ensure that the State Operations Center is staffed with appropriate personnel. Anyone who gets deployed into the State Operations Center will be assigned to the largest of the DRs that are occurring at that period of time. There could be 3 or 4 concurrent relief operations. We'll usually go to the largest, request in a staff person for that largest operation, and then have them assigned to the State Operations Center. There's a big difference between the A shift and the B shift responsibilities in the State Operations Center. But before I get into that, let me go into some of the positions that we're looking for in terms of folks who really, by the nature of their jobs and the relationships they manage, we would expect could work in the State Operations Center. So we've got government operations supervisors and managers. That's our traditional track. I'll get into some of the unique requirements of our A shift in a second. But certainly a regional disaster officer, a senior disaster program manager, even a disaster program manager, one who really likes and orients towards engaging with partner agencies. Anyone with an operations management GAP, group activity position, our DDSRDs, Kathy Guptill, my counterpart up to the north. Kathy's come down and worked in the State Operations Center. We've had DDSRD out from New York, from Texas come on up and support us. We've had division disaster executives work in the State Operations Center. So Denise Everhart from our very own Pacific Division. We also had Dave Gutierrez come to support out of North Central. And then we've also had other folks on a case-by-case basis, but really people that we as division staff are familiar with and know and trust. And on a case-by-case basis, there are others we've brought in, and a number have done quite well. When we look at the B shift, there aren't as many decisions that get made in the B shift. The B shift is more about maintaining the operation, providing situational awareness, and really ensuring the midnight shelter count is done accurately, and that the morning briefing goes off smoothly. So someone who's very good with document management, attention to detail, likes to focus on the data, but we're really looking at government operations supervisors and managers, and for larger operations, that's usually the staff request that we put up on the door. We're specific that it is an overnight position, so that we don't have someone expecting to work days and then they arrive and are asked to work nights. When we look at the chain of command, this is a big one. The A shift, one thing that we're seeing, we're making an argument to have something built into the ConOps revision. We'll see if that happens, concept of operations for the Red Cross. But what we have done on, I think, the last 4 or 5 divisional operations in California, we've basically had the person who is the lead Red Crosser for the A shift has reported either directly to the Relief Operation Director, to the Job Director, or to the Red Cross Coordinating Officer, the RCCO. The reason for that, and this is also true, this happens in Texas and this happens in Florida, but because we have multi-region states, because we have large states with very strong emergency management agencies and strong state resources and resource capabilities, a lot of decisions do get made at the state level. Everyone is fully aware that all operations start local, are managed locally, and are run locally, but the larger an operation, the more overwhelmed locals become. We start working in a multi-county environment where people from Lake County start evacuating into Yolo or Colusa or Butte County. They come into Sacramento, they go down to San Francisco, and so we're forced in working with county partners to help our counties lean forward, to help support in shelter openings and shelter activations in counties that are not directly affected by a disaster. And so as a result, the work that takes place during the A shift in the SOC in California is actually very well done, well performed by someone who can wear an operations management hat. You've got to know the planning piece. You don't have to run tactics meetings and planning meetings and create IAPs. You've got to know how to read the IAP, but many people can do that. But you actually will find that you will sort of run your own pseudo-tactics meeting within the Mass Care Shelter Task Force, because we have a whole bunch of state resources that are supporting our shelters, whether they're working in our shelters, whether they're being deployed next to or outside of our shelters. For example, the California Department of Public Health deployed DMAT teams, disaster medical assistance teams, who helped with quarantine at the request of Butte County Public Health, most recently on the Camp Fire. So we had dozens of medical personnel outside of our shelters, and we were coordinating those assets, making sure we had the right resources at the right time, the right amount, performing the right tasks and functions, that they were connected well with shelter leadership. And a lot of that coordination happens at the state level. So that's where the planning hat comes in. But I also touched on logistics. So the resource requisition, understanding what a resource is, what a force package is, understanding what comes in a 53-foot trailer and what it takes to move that, and whether it makes sense to do a live offload or a drop trailer. Having knowledge of logistics is actually quite important when working in the SOC. I'll talk about the resource requisition process in a second, and you'll see how you've got to have good familiarity. You're not necessarily filling in 6409s, Red Cross requisition forms, but you are working very closely with the state logistics teams. On the operations side, we're constantly using the mass care planning tool, trying to understand if we open these shelters or we have this amount of evacuees, how many shelter workers, how many mass care workers do we need? How many meals are going to be required for this? If we pivot, if we consolidate, if we open up the shelter, how does that stretch our supply chain? So there are a lot of, as you can see, a lot of operations management type functions that are performed for the A shift, which is why we have traditionally, and even most recently, had this position report either to the job director or to the RCCO. We talk about unified command, but one concept that we talk a lot about on operations is swarm leadership. Unity of mission, no ego, no blame, working in concert with a number of different partners. What we're seeing is that when you're in the State Operations Center, you're not in charge, but you're making decisions, you can be making decisions that affect the actual DRO that's taking place somewhere else. And so having real-time seamless communications with the RCCO, with the job director, you might have to talk to the AD Ops, the AD of Logistics. You might need to reach out to the government operations team within the DR across multiple districts. And so having that level of authority, but also being sort of a known asset, so people, quite frankly, pick up the phone when you call or text. They know that you need information on a real-time basis, and that there's things, systems, assets that are waiting for a decision. So what we're really looking at is on these level 5, 6, and 7 operations. Most recently, these have been large wildfires. You're very, very active. That first week, it is a nonstop. You're working a 12-hour shift, where you know you've got to have a butt in a seat, but you probably won't get out of there for 14 to 16 hours to get there early, to be ready for morning briefings, and then to do wrap up and brief your evening team. The B shift can still make some decisions, but for the most part, the B shift really is working to make sure that there are no surprises overnight, to rapidly report any issues that bubble up, that require Red Cross action. But perhaps most importantly, it is ensuring that the overnight, the midnight shelter counts are accurate. One thing that is unique in some ways to California, but is something that's here to stay, is that outside counts are something that are going to be required by the state. That's something they're expecting over and over again. Now, what is an outside count? On the Red Cross side, we're still trying to figure that out. But for the most part, we're looking at how many people are parked outside the shelter, whether they're an RV, a car, a tent, or hanging around. How many people are outside those shelters who are still touching the mass care footprint? They may not be a shelter client, but they are somebody who is maybe coming in for feeding, charging phones, they need information. They're someone who is displaced, and they certainly aren't in their homes. Otherwise, they would not be there. They would be home. They're also probably people who don't have strong familial or friendship ties, where they don't have a family they can go stay with, or they choose not to stay with. And so one of the things that we're working on, and it is an expectation for any folks who serve in operations management or serve in a director role, in California, we will be doing outside counts moving forward, and those counts are going to be reported up through the chain of command, not necessarily into the national shelter system, but those are numbers that are going to be watched in real time by the Unified Command Group, UCG, in California. And when those numbers are off or they don't come in, people start knocking on that door for us. So the B shift, again, even on some of the busiest operations, the B shift really is the sustainment role. They don't necessarily serve in the operations management function, but it is a very, very active and very busy role. The first week for the State Operations Center is when we're really like in a relief operation internally. That is the busiest time. That is where we're building and growing. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of chaos. It's hectic. We're trying to make sense out of the noise. And after that first week, it does start to settle out a bit. We hit a rhythm, and there is a little bit of room and space to breathe. But it does depend on the operation. Let's flip over here. This other document we have for your access is the Red Cross Guide to Working at the State Operations Center. We talk about acronyms and shorthand. We also talk about a packing list. What you're expected to wear, what you're going to see people wear, so you're not surprised. We also talk about logistics, where to park, how to get there. What about meals? What about bathroom, shower, etc. The battle rhythm and when meetings occur. The relationships, which names you're going to expect to hear, who you're going to be working with closely. But what I will focus on here is, I'll leave this up for anyone who wants to look at it, but really you've got strong relationships with Cal OES, California Office of Emergency Services, the California Department of Social Services, our partner in EF6. We're also going to be having feeding partners, so you'll see some folks from the Southern Baptist or Salvation Army, since they're the ones actually producing the meals and we just serve, transport, distribute the meals. You're going to work very closely with California Department of Public Health. You're going to work very closely with the California Emergency Medical Services Agency, EMSA. They oversee the ambulance strike teams and they oversee EMS for the state of California. You'll also work very closely with the State Office of Access and Functional Needs. They're locked at our hip. There will usually be FEMA representatives in the task force with us. On the logistics side, and I said I'd come back to logistics, on the logistics side, let's go to this one. On the logistics side, you're going to work very closely with the Department of General Services. They oversee all of the state contracts, so they make sure that shower trailers and toilets and generators and big specific requests, they ensure that gets fulfilled. One of the things that I really want to double down on here is the access and functional needs request process in shelters. And this applies if you're working in the SOC, you need to know this, but also if you're working a Red Cross operation, this is what's happening behind the scenes. So recently on I believe it was the Carr and the Mendocino fires, the Department of Social Services, Red Cross, Office of Access and Functional Needs, and the Mass Care Task Force all agreed on this. But basically, FAST teams, functional assessment support teams, they come to the shelter. They're going to check in, and their expectation is to introduce themselves to the shelter manager. Client needs get identified by anybody. It could be FAST, Red Cross, CalMat, any number of teams. The shelter manager really is the person working to check and see if resources are on hand. If they are not on hand, they submit a request through Red Cross Logistics. Our Red Cross logisticians work their process. If we, Red Cross, can't find it or won't get there in time, we will, as we normally do, we will kick that request to the County Emergency Operations Center. The county will check for supplies. If the county doesn't have the supplies, they're going to actually go through California's version of Web EOC, and that request will work its way up to the State Operations Center. Logistics at the State Operations Center receives that request, brings it to the task force to validate it. Once validated, they create a mission assignment. That is a process, it's a system, it's a ticket in a system that allows the Department of General Services to go and request those resources. It could be 50 wheelchairs, it could be a Hoyer lift, could be bariatric cots, whatever it is. But the state at that point will find a way to procure those resources, and the state will deliver those resources to the shelter. So at any point in time, if you want to know if something been kicked up, we actually at the State Operations Center are tracking many of those things, many of those processes. The other piece of resource request is how we are working with the government, and this is going to be similar to what I just described. But shelter manager is going to check again. Red Cross resources are going to, Red Cross logistics will check for resources, eventually kicks to the county, county kicks it through WebEOC to the state, logistics gets it on their computer, they walk over to the Mass Care Task Force, the task force makes sure that we are in alignment, that there is in fact that need and it wasn't some just rogue shelter manager, and that the county did check for resources and they don't have them. These resources are procured and they're delivered to the shelter. And this is a really important thing that we're focusing on at the State Operations Center, is to make sure that a trailer or a shipment doesn't just show up in some part of a parking lot, that there is actual positive contact so that that resource, when delivered, makes its hands into the shelter team. The shelter manager is notified, etc. And that's why we're using that incident action plan so closely, so we always have a point of contact and we know who to contact. But this is something that we've documented. This is something that's on the wall as part of the Mass Care Task Force, and it's something we're always looking to improve the process, but really to ensure that no balls get dropped. So those are two documents that you've got access to in the tracker on the Division SharePoint site. Another tool we use commonly at the State Operations Center is the Mission Tracker, which can be accessed by going to the Pacific Division SharePoint site or to the DR homepage, clicking on the left-hand side for Mission Tracker, and it pulls the high-level Mission Tracker here. You put in a priority, specific DR, a mission title, status, request type, which agency is requesting. This is a wonderful way for us to be able to coordinate actions, ensure accountability of those actions, and ensure resolution. The other piece that I wanted to go into is there's a lot that happens in terms of data management. Now, we have the National Shelter System, but in the Mass Care Shelter Task Force, there's always an Excel sheet up on the big screen. And this is because not only of outside counts, but also to track independent shelters, also to track some of the resources and unmet needs, and to do some minutia capturing for each of the shelters that are open. And so this is the template that we actually use, this Excel sheet. And so this is something you can get familiar with, but you can do shelters pretty straightforward, Excel. Shelters by event, the status, any unmet needs, when is the shelter closing if we know, what about the midnight count, and we've got some pivot tables here that start to calculate a couple things. But then we also have planning factors where we've got county population, and so some of these things can be built into some of our tools, help us work alongside the Mass Care Planning tool. But we also are tracking feeding. There's a lot of feeding that happens outside of Red Cross feeding, whether it's Salvation Army, Southern Baptist, World Central Kitchen, or someone else. And on recent operations, we've even got as granular, because we've had meals not show up, we've had the wrong kinds of meals, we've had inadequate supply of meals. We're tracking for breakfast, lunch, dinner, if we're doing all three, who's preparing the meal, when's it coming, how's it coming, what's the number of meals, what's on the menu, and then are there any unmet needs. And so if we can't address that for all feeding locations or for a specific feeding location, then we have a problem. But we work through that, and that's why we have feeding folks as part of the Mass Care Task Force working through those issues. And so at the task force level, we're not working the tactics, but we're working to ensure that any unmet needs are resolved. And so that's one of the tabs that we have here. And the last one that we use is we actually are capturing different staging areas. Right Cross, we stage in our DRO warehouses with logistics. We also leverage the state and the federal staging areas. My counterpart, Ty Franklin, the Division Disaster Director, spent many days and nights at the state staging area, working to make sure that our shipments came in on time, to make sure that our shipments were counted, that they didn't disappear, to make sure that nobody from the state or the feds or the National Guard or the military kicked our stuff out. And that required a whole level of relationship management. And so staging areas are a big thing in California. They often happen close to CAL FIRE base camps or to airfields, could be private airports. But many of our resources also get put at staging areas. And the nice thing about co-locating is if we need a trailer moved, if we need resources delivered in the middle of the night or moved rapidly to a shelter, we have at our fingertips, we can ask for state support where some of their drivers and cabs can actually move some of our supplies for us if we can't get one of our drivers. And so that's why tracking things at our staging area are quite critical in the state of California. So this master data table, which has some of our shelter information, you'll have access to this, and this is something you'll be using at the State Operations Center when you are activated. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day today, and look forward to seeing you all soon, talking to you on the phone soon, and hopefully working with you and exercising with you even sooner. So with that, have a wonderful afternoon and a great rest of the week.